Hello, this is Cryptolyze. I hope you are well. This Tuesday, 19 December 2023. We meet today to talk about crypto, to talk about current events, to talk about BTC, and it starts right away. If you want to train and really enjoy bull running, it's simple. There is perfect, complete, free training available. It's through an educational journey that teaches you everything about blockchain, crypto, investment, technical analysis, and trading. All this for free in comments and descriptions. You have exercises, multiple choice questions, modules, videos, guides, everything to support you in your progress. We'll start with the news that revolves around FTX. It's not really news, but in any case, we have had new reports which really question us about the procedure for filing for bankruptcy in the USA, and in particular, its cost. We're talking about $53,000 every hour that FTX remains in bankruptcy, and that's really what costs the most. In particular, we have a document which showed us that it has cost $14 billion over the past year, and the shortfall for those who have been impacted by FTX. Well, it's $14 billion, so here we are still in something which is quite extraordinary, and I told you anyway from the start that it was more we were going to stay in this notion of filing for bankruptcy, the more complicated it was going to be to recover funds, especially now that we have the Americans and American taxes coming knocking on FTX's door asking for $24 billion, I think, if I don't say anything stupid. So it's going to hurt a lot. It's okay. Be really very complicated, I think, to recover the funds, and it will always be the same problem as with FTX. There is the money, but will we be able to be reimbursed, at least those who were impacted by FTX? I think the response wasn't right away, and as usual, everyone will try to drain FTX first, and even then they tried to change things a little bit to ensure that the people who were impacted are not reimbursed compared to what they had on the platform. So, for example, if you had a BTC, you will not receive a BTC, but you will receive the fiat equivalent of the BTC at the time of the FTX crash. So imagine that it did not at all the same value to follow. In any case, I think that we will still wait to talk about FTX, and it's a goose that lays the golden eggs. So I don't see why they would solve the problem straight away. Why they couldn't take $1 billion more while waiting. On the AVAX side, as I told you, we have a massive wave of registrations on many blockchains and avalanches to recover $13.8 million in fees on registrations over the last 5 days. Really Avalanche, which bursts on the rise and in which we also see a form of gamification. That is to say that we really have the whole game file which totally bursts on Avalanche mainly, where we have valuations of certain altcoins which are in the game file domain on Avalanche, which also bursts. And besides, it's also a bit of a period because we also have Fungible, which is doing a sale again, particularly of cards that we find. So Fungible, I remind you that this is a game that I told you about, which is a tennis simulation game. So we have Sora for football, we have Ovali for rugby, and then we have Fungible for tennis, in which we have the possibility, finally we will have the possibility, of having a simulation game in which we will return a certain number of statistics that correspond with cards. And these cards will have the player's statistics updated regularly, well, even almost instantly, in real time, and they have launched a new card sale, so in which there is the possibility of recovering a certain number of cards. I started bidding on some of them. If you missed the first sale, now is the time. Know that there are still cards which are very accessible, in which we have timers which are present. So obviously we will have a certain number of days, hours to be able to bid. So you must not miss the mark if it interests you. Please note that in the description in the comments, you have my link which will allow you, for example, if you buy 3 cards to recover an additional one. If you buy 10, it recovers 1, but from the upper third and so on. So this will allow you to have a larger collection. If, like me, you are not necessarily a fan of football, but you are more of a fan of tennis and rugby. Well, in this case, there is Fungible here in which you can have access to new cards to create your avatar and be able to test the game when it is released. That being said, we continue with SEC. The SEC delaying Ethereum ETFs and postponing its decision. In May, so it's very far away once again, we ask ourselves the question of when they will validate the BTC ETFs. But there are not only these ETFs there are the Ethereum ETFs. Then I agree with you that of BTC had a legal instruction in which we pushed the SEC to rethink the thinking around spot BTC ETFs differently. Is it the same thing at the level of ETFs Ethereum? I don't think so. He has a lot of trouble talking about Ethereum. Every time he talks about Ethereum, he walks around and does backflips to avoid trying to say if it's a securities or a commodities. But in any case, what is sure and certain is that I think that we will have validation of ETFs. Whether it is Ethereum, whether it is BTC, the big question is when and that's why. But makes us think that Q2 2024 for ETFs. So BTC ETF and Ethereum ETF. For Q2 seems completely logical to us. A little more delay for ETF's Ethereum spot. On the macro news side, we have the IPC core, which will fall to the level of Europe. Well, quite few movements. Allows us to build also quite few movements, which will be important. It will necessarily be Wednesday and especially Wednesday. We have the confluence board and sales of existing homes, very important. American real estate market, very, very important. And then we will necessarily have the quarterly GDP on Thursday, which falls and which will be validated. We will have the Fed indicator at the very important Philadelphia level, and we will have Friday. We will close this week precisely before Christmas, with the PCE core, in which I think we will have the last really big news of this month, in which we can really have big movements to follow. In any case, we will cover it on the channel. At the SP 500 level, we continue to push. We try to make a new 80th. We are really getting closer, but we are not breaking this 80th, which is very present and which is well rated. What's interesting is that it's the same at the NASDAQ level. NASDAQ, we attack, we touch, we strengthen, but we are not currently breaking this ATX, whereas when we look at certain ETFs, like for example here the MSI World, this one is capitalizing, so that means that it systematically re-injects the dividends within the ETF itself. But we see that we broke a very nice ATH here in December, early December, and we are in the process of re-accelerating. So that means that when we takes into account all the dividends that have been paid, so these are the elements that have been detached from the price to pay back to the various shareholders, and that we re-inject them into the price. We will have something which is much more accelerating with a very bullish momentum behind it. Why do I talk about MSI World this way? This is because it is mainly composed of S&P 500 and NASDAQ, given that there is an overrepresentation of the American market within the MSI World. But in all cases, we wait this week, see if yes or no, close, even this month, we close this month close, or do we manage to exceed, to close above and make a new ATH on this end of the year. 2023 to start on a year 2024 with a closing of a new ATH, which would be very important, and which will be a sufficiently important vector to potentially have a continuity of upward acceleration, because we are really in an important retracement zone in which we are still in this contraindication, in this overreaction of the market in relation to all the news that is available. Moreover, in terms of oil, we have a continuity of repurchase. We can clearly see the wick here in monthly, which is being purchased, which is rather classic. So for me, we are in something normal. We are in the really zone of resistance. We see that we have nevertheless moved on to 72. As a reminder, we still made an attempt at 68. And we see that we are redeemed to certainly go back above the 70, installed above the 70. It is even very probable to set up a range between 75 and we will say between 80 and 65 to oscillate for a certain time, because that is normal. There we have political tensions around this area of the price of a barrel of oil, and obviously that influences inflation. So it influences the American economy. And if we have a barrel that is too low, it directly influences the OPEC countries. It is really an asset that will be at the center of geopolitical discussions. At the BTC level, we made an acceleration really last night, very strong, in which we are trying to return to a very important zone at the level of the Ichimoku and really make this break at the level of the Kumo, which could also be very important. So we are in monthly view. Once again, we have time. It is only December 19th, so we will have to validate and close above, at least monthly. Short term. And when we quickly look at weekly, we see that we have filled the CME gap, which was very present here in the bearish acceleration. We are just going to zoom in. We can clearly see here the CME gap. We have filled it. And when we have satisfied, we re-accelerated once again. We went to retest this upper part again. Very interesting, the retest that is carried out here, in which we did not go to look for the liquidity of this move. We went to retest it here, all right? We really went to retest it right away. So what's interesting to see is that generally when it's like that, we recreate liquidity. So there we really have a strengthening of this liquidity bias. We have a great reaction here on the trend line, which is rather classic. Trend line once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So here we are going to retest. so that makes a very nice support. Generally, obliques don't hold much, so that's why I don't talk about them very much. And generally, it's just a means of confirmation for me, especially when we have an accent here, when we have some makes an oblique in this way, and above all, a big resistance which is present here. So when we have a confluence like that, generally it holds rather well, especially since I told you that as long as we hold this low to, well, there was no inversion, okay? This one for me is more liquidity. We went to look for it. What surprised me was that we didn't even go look for the first candle to at least recover the liquidity. That's it. It's done. So little bearish candle, we recover the liquidity. There we have the low, which is very present. If it holds, there is no need to think more. That means that we're going to look for the top here with the CME gap, and then go deeper with perhaps a small bit, which will look for the gap. CME, and we go again and still do this setup here of ranging to potentially stay for a long time, a few months, maybe a few weeks. The time we have news about ETFs and the time we close the year start next year. We could very well also have a range that is positioned in this way, so we can consider that to be an excess. Then we re-enter the range. We set up an oscillation within the range, and in which we will stay before perhaps having a small insert at the top, a small insert at the bottom, but which will therefore be overflows. And it is quite classic in terms of setting up range trading. What will be interesting is to look at the order flow in which we still have quite a few little things. If we take a step back, we can see that there we had a break point, which was October 23, in which the majority of people went long. So which is the representation of the funding rate, therefore which represents the positions of the people who are leveraged on the market, okay? It's really the positioning of the levers. Unfortunately, it's not just the positioning of the spots, it's only the lever, and in which here we see that we had a small period of inflection. But above all that, we have had a re-increase since we had this bullish re-acceleration, and that we maintain this high level of leverage in the positions here, while we are in this phase of uncertainty in which we have made a bearish breakout here, and we have not reclaimed the game higher. We have not reclaimed the higher liquidity part. We have not reclaimed the CME gap. So that implies that we are holding the position, yes, and that the people are holding the positions. Hold long positions, and these are not short-term positions. When we look a little at the clusters, we see that the majority of the longs are below 38,000, 36,000. When we look on Kingfisher and take a step back, yes, the longs, indeed they are relatively far away. We see that it is below 40,000, and the majority are below 38,000, with a large pool between 34,000 and 32,000. Okay? So the long ones are really very far away and are in the majority, okay? And what about the shorts? In terms of shorts, we still have very, very aggressive shorts. Still this level which holds and which will be defended, I told you precisely, the 43,500. I told you that this level at HOP, we are going to return to the good graph. This level, it was going to be really defended at the level of the CME game because we had a lot of shorts, and we see that we are pressing again at the level of the shorts. We see that we have a rejection which is very strong. I think that given the liquidity, the strengthening of liquidity that we have there, we could have a breather to get 41,930. We will say 42,000 before being able to retest and actually break this liquidity. When we see here an equal high which is set up in this way and which is carried out in this way, it implies that we are creating liquidity here to go and get it. In any case, I personally see it as that, and it is also explained for me when we look at the creation of liquidity that we clearly see that we went to look for liquidity here. We clearly see that the movement did not create a lot of liquidity in the long run. We have a little bit, but it's relatively weak. The initial movement here we have very little long which is present, so we really have a desire to create shorts currently, so there. For me, the next really big movement will be the liquidation of this part, fill the gap. At the top in any case, and even recover the liquidity, why not above 44? It would be quite aggressive and quite positive for the market. That means that we would continue to hunt for liquidity in the short for the long term, and namely that we still have a small CVD loss, so it is really a 100 perpetual movement which took place, therefore very aggressive on it to accompany the upward movement, so rather classic. We are still reviewing this system that we have for some time now. Number of weeks where we systematically push for perpetual. The other latest news is that when we look at the total 3, the fact of having had this acceleration has made it possible to have a bullish revival on all altcoins, which is rather positive, and the altcoins have even grown more important than BTC on this acceleration. And this is something that we have seen for some time already, and once again it is very positive. I hope you liked this video. If so, don't forget to leave me a like and a comment. It supports the work I do, it makes me very happy, and we'll see each other again to 1330 for a video on KS on Kaspa. So this is a request that you made. This is what came up the most. And I will deal with the other cryptos as the week goes on and next week. And I wish you a very good day.